All right, welcome to another LCSC Skills Builder workshop. This week we actually have a special guest. Kyle Ferguson is going to be talking about the topic of communication. And just to give a little more information about Kyle, Kyle is the interim chair of the humanities, and he's also a communication arts instructor at LC State. Prior to LC State, he was the sports information director before serving as the director of athletics at San Diego Christian College. So Kyle, welcome, and thank you very much for taking the time today to talk to us about important leadership skills like communication.
Awesome. Thanks, Tate. I'm excited to be here. I enjoy the subject of communication, and I'm excited to talk about an aspect of that with nonverbal comm. All right, we ready to jump in?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Can you see the PowerPoint or no? Are we good? There we go. All right. So let's kind of talk about this. Is me right there. Say hi to myself there. Let's jump into this though. So we're going to talk about communication, and really beyond that, like I said, a small aspect of communication, and that's nonverbal communication and the power that comes with and influence that comes with nonverbal communication. So first thing I have here is a quote. Depending on your age, this may resonate with you a little more, and I might have dated myself with this one, but that's okay because I think it still makes the point. It says 60% of all human communication is nonverbal body language. 30% is your tone. So that means that 90% of what you're saying ain't coming out of your mouth. And this, of course, was said by renowned date doctor Alex Hitchens in the movie Hitch. So it's a fun quote, but at the same time, it really highlights the power and what comes with nonverbal communication. Some experts say upwards of 94% of what we say is beyond just those words that are coming out of our mouth. So what we're going to do today is go through a few things. The first thing we're going to do is define communication before we can look at nonverbal communication. We have to really know what communication is to start. Then we're going to briefly talk about nonverbal comm. Watch the TED Talk by Joe Navarro called The Power of Nonverbal Communication. And then we're going to discuss the power and importance of nonverbal communication while also looking at and kind of reflecting on what Navarro shared with us. So first things first, we want to establish what communication is. So think with me, if you will. You're in a conversation with your significant other, and he or she says that they're going to go buy a cheap car. How much will they spend on that car? What will that car cost? This actually is something I used I use this in my classes, and I tried it out on my wife, and we were in conversation, and I said, hey, if you're going to buy a cheap car, how much would be that dollar figure you're going to spend on that car? She sat there for a moment and she goes, maybe like $18,000. I was like, 18 grand for a cheap car? And it actually really illustrated the point perfectly. Because when I said cheap car, she thought cheap new car, which $18,000 for a new car is really cheap. Me being my frugal-minded self, I was thinking significantly less. So that gives a good example of what I'm getting to with our definition of communication. Or try this one on for size. Some of you may be fans of the TV show Friends. Ross and Rachel were, if you aren't a fan, we'll explain it here a little bit. Ross and Rachel were in a relationship, and they're in a fight. Rachel tells Ross, maybe we should just take a break. And Ross is like, okay, let's go get some frozen yogurt. Let's take a break. And Rachel goes, no, take a break from us. And Ross grabs his coat, quietly leaves the apartment. In Ross's mind, a break from us means they're broken up. They're no longer in a relationship. Ross goes and does something he later regrets. Rachel, to her, a break was, we're going to take a moment, take the night. And the next day she showed up at his apartment to talk about what that means. This led to Ross talking the entire time about his definition of break compared to Rachel's definition of break. So really what it comes down to when we define communication is really what I always say, shared meanings. When you think communication, think shared meaning. So here's from Korn. He said, despite their many disagreements, most would concur that at its essence, communication is about messages to generate meanings. And the meanings are in people, not in the words. So when I say cheap, the meaning, the communication there, and understanding what my wife and I are talking about, the meaning is in the word cheap, right? And it's the meaning, or the meaning is not in the word cheap, the meaning is in us as people. With Ross and Rachel, the meaning is in them, not in the word break itself. So communication is really about shared meaning. So now that we have the basis of that, let's take a look at nonverbal communication. So nonverbal communication is best defined as messages expressed by their non-linguistic means. So like we said, like Hitch said, body language and tone. So everything but the words themselves are going to be nonverbal communication. As I get older, I've enjoyed Dilbert a lot more. So I threw this comic strip on there because I thought it was a fun way of highlighting nonverbal communication. You can read it as I'm talking here and kind of looking at things. But nonverbal communication is really just anything that's not the actual words themselves. So non-linguistic means we're looking at body language, we're looking at tone. So some characteristics of nonverbal communication before we jump into the video that we're going to watch. The first characteristic is it's always occurring. You cannot not communicate. Now I'll actually give you an activity at the end of this that you can go try yourself and try to not communicate. So it's always occurring. Nonverbal communication is always occurring. If you think about trying to not communicate, what are you actually communicating? Okay, next is primarily relational. For example, my wife knows my nonverbal cues a lot more than another person would know. So in those relationships, those deeper relationships, those nonverbal cues are going to be easier to decipher. Although at the same time, it's often ambiguous. And sometimes it's very ambiguous. It's going to leave you very confused. If someone says something and their nonverbal cues are very different than what the words coming out of their mouth, we're going to find it to be very ambiguous and unclear. So that gives us the basis of where we are. So let's take the next 13 minutes here, pull this up. There's a couple different things you can do. They're going to put the link for this in the chat. But at the same time, you can, if you wanted to type out that whole link, you could. However, if you just go to YouTube and you type in the power of nonverbal communication, Joe Navarro, it'll be the top thing that comes up. So let's take a few minutes, we'll watch it, and we'll come back and we'll kind of just break it down and decipher what Navarro told us. All right, welcome back. Hopefully that was enjoyable. He's a good speaker. I enjoy the empathy he shows in the way in which he speaks. So let's talk a little bit about this and let's reflect like our friend Tom here on screen is doing. So a couple things that Navarro said. The first one that I want to point out, he said the only way to be truly empathetic is by understanding nonverbals. Now, if we think about this for a moment, imagine you have a friend who's very upset or hurt by something. Now walking up to them, your tone of voice, the expression on your face, putting an arm around your friend, all those things are a way to be empathetic. Where if you just walked up and bluntly said, I hope you're feeling better, changes the entire dynamic of that. Or, hey, I really hope you're feeling better, put an arm around them. It changes the entire dynamic of the conversation and really allows us to be empathetic. Another thing he says, our influence matters, that we influence others through nonverbal. Communication has power. Undoubtedly, it has power. Over the course of history, communication has immense power, and a lot of that has to do with the nonverbal side of it. We can use nonverbal communication to make a difference. So one of the questions he said, and the questions that he proposed to the audience is to ask yourself is, how do I change my nonverbals? What I added here is, how can I be mindful of nonverbals? And I'm going to open that up for the sake of time. We won't spend too much time on this because I want to talk a little bit more about my next question here. But does anyone have a response to this? I know we have a group down in the sub, and we also have some people online. If you want to throw some comments up there as well, feel free to. But how do you change your nonverbals? And a bigger thing is, how can you be mindful about your nonverbals? What steps can you take to be mindful? This is an opinion-based question. What are things you've experienced that you've done well with? Share with us so we can learn from you.
I know Ben's got to have something down there.
I have no problem sitting in silence. It's a lot in class, so it's okay. I don't mind.
Actually, I had a bit of a question.
Yeah, go for it.
In nonverbal communication, what I've learned is that kind of like a picture can speak 1,000 words. If you heard that saying.
Absolutely.
Somebody's body language can speak 1,000 words.
Oh, that's good.
For instance, this morning I was on the bus with a friend, and immediately when I turned that corner up the stairs to get onto the bus, I could tell he was pissed off, upset, and he was on the verge of exploding. So I just kind of went over to him and I said, "Hey, what's the matter? Is there anything I can help you with?" And it basically shut his whole entire mood down right then and there.
Yeah, that's awesome. What an example. I love the practicality of communication, right? Like we just talked about this, and you even see an example from this morning. The power of nonverbal communication, walking in and just seeing a friend, just from nonverbal communication can speak 1,000 words. Body language can speak 1,000 words. I like that statement. I'm probably going to steal it for my classes, actually, if you don't mind. That's a good one.
Okay.
Thanks so much for sharing. All right. Doesn't sound like anyone else is adding anything, so I'm going to jump to my next question because I like this one as well. So this, again, is something that we can learn from one another on. So in a virtual world with Zoom, email, text, social media, how can we properly use nonverbals? I actually wanted to add a whole portion of this presentation on mediated communication, like text, email, social media, all that stuff, on nonverbal communication within mediated communication, but we're completely run out of time. So maybe in the future, we'll do one just on that because I think it's a very important issue to evaluate. How can we properly use our nonverbals in this ever increasing virtual world in which we live? Or how do you currently do it? Question. What can you share with us?
Emojis.
Yeah, emojis are huge, right? Absolutely. Actually, if you say, "Hey, you're driving me crazy," that's a good one, right? If you're driving me crazy and you put a smiley face, you're driving me crazy, put an angry face, right? Those are very different things, same words, but the nonverbal communication is lost in it. And I don't know if you've ever received a text, I can almost guarantee you have, where you misread the tone, or you sent a text and that person misread the tone, and then you end up having to explain beyond that. Yeah, very good. What else? What are some other things you do? Emojis are great.
I use like you have in your presentation.
Yeah, me too, for sure. As you can tell by my PowerPoint here. Yeah, those are very, very helpful and often funny, let's be honest. All right, we have about minutes left here. So anyone else want to add what you do or things that might help us as we navigate this?
I'm going to go ahead and take it off mute there downstairs. I think the volume might be a little loud on the speakers there, Allie. You might want to turn that down a little bit. Could help with our reverberation just a little bit. We did have somebody chime in here and posted a question or made a statement, I guess, about the nonverbal question that you had. She says, "I changed my nonverbal by changing my attitude or thought process." So,
absolutely. We wear a lot. I'm this way, and a lot of us do. We determine where your emotions on your sleeve, right? Like how you're feeling is easily displayed. But changing the attitude can often change your entire nonverbal presentation. All right, so thank you guys. That was great. I appreciate the participation. I know it's a little more difficult in the situation we're in, but that's awesome. The last thing that Navarro left us with is that we have choices. And that goes back to choosing your attitude, right? We have choices on how we present ourselves nonverbally and how we use nonverbal communication. So choose wisely and be thoughtful about how we go about approaching it. So I'm going to leave you with an activity, take-home activity. If you're interested, you don't have to do this, but it's an option because it kind of helps highlight the importance of nonverbal communication, and then also really highlights that you cannot not communicate. So Demonstrate for yourself that it is impossible to avoid communicating non-verbally by trying not to communicate with a friend or a family member. And you can be the judge whether to tell this person ahead of time or not. See how long it takes for your partner to inquire about what is going on and to report on what he or she thinks you might be feeling or thinking. So if you try to not communicate, see how quickly you're communicating is really what it comes down to. And then the final thing I'll leave you with is if you do this, just in everything, really take note of how much you're saying really ain't coming out of your mouth, like Hitch told us in the beginning. So that's what I have. Thank you all for your attention. Tate will leave us with a little bit left right now. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Kyle, I do have a question for you. Since you're going through this whole COVID thing, it's interesting with the nonverbals. How do you feel like that is impacting us, where we don't have the ability to see maybe the full face because we got this mask on, and handshakes. Right now, we're doing some interviews for student leadership positions, and we're doing them mainly through Zoom so we can see the face. Mm-hmm. But typically, we do it in person, where you could have a handshake and a greeting and all this sort of thing. And it's just kind of a different world that we're living in. What are your thoughts on, on that in general?
It's funny. I cut a question. I had a question I was going to ask, like, what do you all think post-COVID nonverbal communication looks like once we get back into things? What things go away? Do handshakes go away? All this type of stuff. It's a weird time for sure. I know as some teaching in a classroom and talking with my colleagues, very difficult to read that nonverbal communication. Even right now, I almost said this at the beginning, not sitting in a room with people. And you usually, as a speaker, you feed off that energy of an audience, and it's very difficult talking to a computer or even talking with students in class when I can only see their eyes. And one thing I struggle with is just recognizing them outside of the classroom, which I don't enjoy. But I have a whole lot of thoughts on the importance of community and the fact that how things are shifting digitally. And I think I desire, and I hope we get back to more, the interpersonal face-to-face settings sooner than later, because I think it's very valuable. Human touch is valuable. Handshake, there's a reason why handshakes are a thing, right? And it's not just to spread gross germs, but it's important to get that physical touch, right? It's important to have a handshake. It's important to sit across from someone and look into their eyes. And it's sad we've had to go this way. I understand why we've gone this way, but hopefully we'll get back to it soon. And I'm hoping that we don't lose a lot of the stuff that we've had in the past in the process. And not saying some of the things like this is a great way to get things out there and news out there and information out there. But at the same time, sitting in a room with people and having a conversation is something that's invaluable to the human experience.
Well, thanks for sharing on that. It is a different time for sure. And I look forward to when we can actually, like you said, have a handshake and be in person without a mask on. So, but it looks like we're getting closer and closer every day.
Sooner than later, yeah. I appreciate everyone showing up, even though you're sitting in a different room and wearing a mask and all that stuff. And our students should be commended for their attitudes through this whole process. The kudos go to them to dealing with all this stuff, because as a student, I would have had a much more difficult time than I think they're having. So I appreciate them very much.
For sure. Any other last questions for Kyle down in sub 143?
And I would say too, if you don't ask the question now, Nick, swing by my office. I'm in Spalding Hall, and I'd love to chat with you. So don't hesitate to come by and say hi, and we can have a conversation there too. Great.
Well, Kyle, I appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us about this important subject of communication and nonverbal, and gives us a chance to really reflect on our own nonverbals and how to leverage those things for better communication, or just better understand what's going on maybe with some people when they show us those nonverbals. So thank you for taking the time. And
Tate, we got a question, I think, down in the
all right.
So, Mr. Kyle, I actually gotta say your bit on what will what will nonverbal communication be like after COVID? I honestly gotta say it'll probably be pretty weird for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it'll probably affect a lot of people for a lot of years, being pretty much isolated to wearing these masks everywhere for 2 years almost. Kind of sucks, and it'll kind of be slow to go away.
No, I agree completely. Man, it's going to be, I was thinking as I was talking, actually, like it's going to be a little awkward at first, right? I was like, yeah, you can go back to doing stuff. It's like, okay, shaking hands. It's like, it's going to be like kind of like what Mr. Navarro did in the videos, right? Shaking the hand. It's going to be a weird thing to go back to all that stuff. And I think it will take time. I think you're absolutely right. And I don't know what's going to go away and what will stay, because it's going to kind of just see what we decided as a culture. That's a really good point. It's going to be awkward for a while.
All right. Well, thank you again, Kyle. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, if you're interested in more of these types of talks, just encourage you to check out our website. You can go to lcsc.edu/sub-CSL, and you can see it at the bottom of your screen there. There's also a couple other ways to stay connected with us. We have a Facebook page, LC State CSL, as well as an Instagram, which is pretty much the same, instagram.com/CSL. Or LC State CSL. And then we do have a Do More app, which is a great application for students to use that want to get involved in knowing what's happening on campus, as well as joining clubs. And also you can get some points kind of tracked on the system for different things that you go to, like this event right here. So I'd encourage you to check out more that we have coming in the next month or two here by going to our website. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.